To discuss is Bess Freedman, CEO of Brown Harris Stevens. Bess, glad to have you on this morning. What's your reaction to this week's mortgage application data? And I'm curious, how do you think Russia's invasion of Ukraine is impacting the housing market? This hasn't been kind of an intuitive connection because we do focus on oil prices and how the invasion impacts that. But we are seeing an impact here in the housing market.
Hi, Alicia. Good morning. Nice to see you. Can you hear me okay? Because
Yes.
you're a little bit choppy. Okay, good. As long as you can hear me. So listen, I think that, as you know, real estate is all about supply and demand. And we've had historic records last year and this year. The challenge for us in housing is really one of supply. And so we're seeing prices tick up as inflation goes up, shrinking supply, and that's an issue. And I think that what's going on right now with the war that Russia has waged against Ukraine offers other challenges globally. We see nervous energy in our markets. You see the volatility with the stock market, which is, concerning for people. And I think what you're going to see in housing is less discretionary spending. For example, Alicia, last week we had a buyer who was signed up to buy something for over $20 million in Palm Beach and decided not to follow through with it. And it was squarely because of what's going on with Ukraine. And it wasn't because he couldn't buy, it was because he felt he wanted to wait and see. And I think we're going to have a lot of wait and see in the housing market when it comes to discretionary spending.
Wow, that's actually an interesting kind of anecdotal story there, and interesting in the greater picture of what you mentioned, the supply side of things. We have seen, inventory levels just maintain these lower levels over the better part of the last 2 years. With inflation and then the expected rate hikes, that's coming up. I'm curious to get your gauge on, demand for, places like large cities in the suburbs throughout the country. Do you think that the demand picture is persistent enough to pass by kind of these higher prices, both on the inflation side and on the interest side?
I think you have the must buyers, the life cycle people who are getting married or having families or, expanding, et cetera, or when people lose loved ones and they decide to sell. So those things are going to continue in the housing market because they just do. That's the must buyer. I think what you're going to see a little bit of a slowdown with is the just because I want to buy, because I can, because I have a lot of money buyer. Although the luxury market has done so well, better than I could have even imagined in 2021. And it continues to do so, particularly, for example, in New York City, the Hamptons, Connecticut, on Palm Beach. Those people are spending a lot of money. But I do think, Alicia, that depending on what happens with the war, that people are going to wait a little bit on the sidelines. People are concerned, they're worried. From a financial perspective, it's concerning, but also on a human level. We're, hearing stories about what families are going through, and it's very hard to be on the sidelines and witness all of this. So I think that, and President Zelensky has shown a level of courage that you don't see in politics quite often. He's being compared to Winston Churchill because he's really got a straight vision to do the right thing and protect the people. And it takes your breath away. So I think we have to kind of wait and see what's going to happen with the markets and where we end up. If this gets resolved, that would be fantastic. But we don't know yet. And I think it's going to take some time.
Such fascinating context there in terms of, again, the picture and the situation in Ukraine. We think of it impacting so many other sectors, not necessarily the housing sector, but you're really illustrating, especially on the higher tier housing and to the luxury buyer, the impact being more broadly significant there. Curious, over 547,000 people moved from Northeast states to a state like Florida, for example, in 2021. When you factor in, you obviously have mentioned a moment ago that New York City has still done relatively well, especially the luxury market here in New York City. When you factor in that move and things like, continued potential waves of COVID-19, or just employers right now adopting this remote work model and this hybrid model just being more dominant than, 2 years ago, certainly, and who knows how dominant it can become. Do you see those as obstacles for luxury real estate, even in a city like New York City?
Yeah, I mean, we have continued obstacles. I mean, that's just a reality. And people did leave New York City. A lot of that had to do with taxes, some of the irresponsible tax legislation that drove people out of New York City. And we're hoping now, Alicia, with a new mayor, Mayor Adams, and a governor, Governor Hochul, who are working together, that we'll have more responsible legislation and keep people in New York City. Very important. And we know that the mayor is working really hard to mitigate crime because we want tourism and we want people to raise families there. But we're seeing continued commitment to New York City. There was something like 41 contracts signed over $5 million last week in New York City, which shows that people want to be a part of the city. And we have a new city council and a new speaker, Adrian Adams. And so I think everybody wants to work together. We're all sort of fatigued of this sort of very left and very right. And we're looking for a more moderate New York City to keep people here. And as we're sort of, hopefully COVID is now in the rearview mirror, I hope, and people are coming back to work. And they want to show up and support local restaurants. It's still, I think, one of the greatest cities in the world, and I'm proud to live there and raise a family there.
Yeah, as a native New Yorker, I share that sentiment, with you as well. What about New Yorkers buying into new developments? Is there a concern over inventory levels, especially over the next 5 years?
You said for new developments?
New developments, New Yorkers buying into new developments. Is there a concern kind of over inventory levels over the next 5 years?
I don't think we see much of a concern. We do see a commitment from developers to build. I mean, the owners of my firm have just got a great new space downtown that they're going to build. They have a new project on the Upper East Side that we're going to launch in April. And you're seeing, other projects all over the Upper East Side and downtown that are selling. And so I think that you're going to see continued commitment for that. Inventory levels, they could be challenged, but again, it all comes down to supply and demand. When there's a healthy intersection between the two, we see our markets moving well. Right now, the challenge is one of supply in other regions. New York City still has a decent amount of supply because, remember, we were in a buyer's market before. We are now definitely in a seller's market. And so we're going to have to wait a little bit of time and see. But we still have healthy inventory in New York City.
I'm curious, what other trends are you noticing within the New York kind of real estate market right now?
Trends are people really want outdoor space. I would say that's the number one trend that I'm seeing. I think the pandemic made people feel like they wanted some fresh air. And the other one is definitely a home office because a lot of people are working from home. They know they can do that. And so they want a little special space where they're not too close to the kitchen, so they're not snacking too much. But I think that a home office and outdoor space are the top two that we're seeing.
Yeah, as someone who spent the first year of the pandemic in a smaller one-bedroom apartment, turning my living room into my office, I completely understand and upgraded to a slightly bigger apartment with some outdoor space. So completely resonates with me there. Before I have to let you go here, what is your outlook on the overall housing market going into the second half of this year? Any chance we see inventory levels pick up and get to that point where there is a better match with demand?
It's hard to say. I think, we see inflation. We're going to see gas prices go up, which is going to be a challenge. I think demand is still high, but supply is challenged, and I don't see a change. The supply chain, lumber, everything is expensive. Inflation is taking its toll. So I think we're going to have a little bit of a slowdown. We had a great 2021. And it's true that the trees can't just grow to the sky. They have to stop at some point. So I think it may slow down a little bit. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, and the slowdown will be good on the buyer side, right? Buyers have been waiting for a little bit of a relief and a little bit of an opportunity to get in there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your insight. Bess Freedman, CEO of Brown Harris Stevens.